This important Digital World Town Hall meeting. Today is Tuesday, April 2nd, 2024. We have a special guest and we have a wonderful agenda ahead of us, but first we'll do a little quick review. We'll do an update on any kind of new technology or tools that we've basically been working on, short-term and long-term, and then general questions. Before that, I'd like to also do an introduction, which we'll do. I'm grateful for those that are in attendance, especially those that are helping from a moderator standpoint. We've actually got Terrence, Wally, and Elle on this one. It's grateful to see all these folks together. This is a private membership association. Some of the things we may talk about may be forward-looking comments. And again, for those that are not aware, it's around a simple model around decentralization. Some of the most important things that we want to talk about is how decentralization actually gets used. And for one of those topics, let's see if I can even... So some of the people online may not be able to see her, but I'd like to introduce a wonderful person that I've personally known, 5 years?
I think about 5 years.
5 years. And so our paths actually crossed because of decentralization. And she not only went and got elected as a county commissioner, but she actually went on to actually focus on things that add value to humanity. It's not just value around some of the things we'll talk about. One of the first things that she launched, and really not just as a program, as the first county or state or country, but also as the first individual globally to actually do a decentralized marriage. So when we talk about it, I'll pull up a simple service here. So for those, some people may say, what is that? It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand how it is. Instead of physically coming together, you actually digitally come together. And so just like we're coming together, for those that are not seeing, that may be watching on a stream, there's actually a bunch of folks that are here that can actually communicate, and we're sharing an experience from all around the world, different countries, different time zones, etc. But they do it in such a way where it's actually using technology to bring people together, to make commitments. In this particular area, maybe it's registering for a license, selecting a date, and then actually getting married. This is the actual document that she created, literally, what was it, 4 years ago?
It was, January of 2020. So it's just over 4 years.
So just over 4 years. And since then, almost 40,000 of these?
We've done over 55,000
wow.
now because our rate has increased as more people in the world have seen and realized what we're doing. We now are issuing 3 times more marriages a year than we were doing in 2019 prior to the launch.
So over 50,000 cryptographic marriages. And that's digitally done online. And when you look at that, this actually means it's got a cryptographic key that's attached to this. Like up on top, you'll actually see these little keys attached to it. And not only was she went and ran for county commissioner and got it, but she's also done other things within that ecosystem, but she actually put herself through this as an individual. So she literally went and got married to a wonderful guy, Tobin, amazing man. And she actually went through this process, was the first person. Not only did she design it, architect it, get it approved by the county and many different ecosystems within it. I'll let her tell you more about that. But
this is mine. This is my digital marriage certificate right here on my phone.
But she actually went in and used these. So a lot of people say, well, great, I believe you that it's actually more secure. I believe you it's the future. But do people actually accept them? And so one of the first couple things, and maybe she can tell you more, these are the only 2 things that I'm aware of. She went in and actually opened a bank account in her new name, her new married name. And I'll let her tell you about that experience, and then also maybe about a driver's license.
Yeah.
Or other things I'm totally ignorant on.
So, do you want me to start on those stories, or
you can focus on any? I just want you to know, Amelia, she's literally the first woman to ever be married with a digital cryptographic marriage ever. And now she's going to tell you how she actually got it not only implemented, but adopted. And then I want to talk about COVID, why this actually mattered later on.
Yeah.
Way later on. So, but
okay.
Please just tell us any of your story or however you want to start.
Yeah. So I started with, when I got into government, one of the things as a citizen that drove me insane about government is that government continually expects us as citizens to comply with their processes. Government is supposed to serve the people. The purpose of government is to serve individuals and to serve citizens and to serve people. But that relationship over the last several hundred years had been flipped backwards, right? And marriage was such a perfect example. I mean, marriage is a covenant between two individuals that the vast majority of people on earth believe that they make before God. So it's a contract between two individuals that they make before God. And yet, in order to do that, they needed a permission slip from the government. I mean, and not only did they need that permission slip from the government, but the government required you to physically go into a government building sometime between 8:30 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday in order to get your permission slip so that you and another consenting adult could make a covenant before God. And it just didn't make any sense to me. So when I got into government, the first thing I wanted to do was to flip this model on its head and say, we as government should be serving the citizens. We should be serving the people, not requiring the people to come before us on our convenience. On top of that, there's another aspect to that, and that's with your identity. With your identity, government controls your data. If you look at all of your identity documents, your birth certificate, your driver's license, your passport, your marriage certificate, every one of those is a government issued document. And if you lose your copy of it, if you lose your physical copy, you have to go back and ask the government for permission to get a new one. So this is your identity. You're a sovereign individual, right? I believe that rights are endowed by our Creator, endowed by God. And yet, here we are. The only way we can prove our identity is with a government document that if we lose, we have to ask them for permission to get a new one. Now, as we move into a digital world, this becomes very frightening, particularly when you start looking at things like social credit scores in China. If China doesn't like the things you say online, then all of a sudden your record of birth disappears. And you can't prove your identity, and you can't get a bank account, and you can't travel, and you can't do any of the things because government has restricted your identity. And so as I started looking at this, I wanted to solve those problems. And as I learned more about cryptography and decentralization, distributed ledger technology, Web3, a lot of people look at this technology and they think, well, this if government harnesses this technology, they can take over everything, which could be true. But Web3 and disruptive technologies are like any other technology. The internet can be used for good. Right now, you're utilizing internet to show people truth, to show people the future, to show people how to do good. But there are people that utilize the internet to distribute child pornography, and they're doing evil. Any technology can be used for good or evil. Technology in and of itself is not inherently good or evil. It's how we utilize it. It's a tool. And so what I realized is that people like me that believe in sovereignty, that believe in liberty, that believe in individual rights need to be the ones in government who are implementing this technology, because then we set the standard. And we set the standard in a decentralized way. And we show that it can be done. So as I started doing that, and then combining that with this idea that government should serve the people, marriage licensing was the natural first step. So we started by creating a completely remote marriage license system that utilizes technology so that you don't have to go to the government to get your permission slip. You can do everything 24/7 with nothing more than a cell phone. And then once we did that, then I said, well, I want to make this accessible, and I want to make it, easily, readily available. But I also want to do it in a way that is secure and that gives people control. And so that's where we utilized a cryptographic key, registered that cryptographic key on a blockchain, on a public blockchain that can then be verified. And we went through and created, in 10 months, we created this marriage license system and then launched that to the world live in January of 2020, pre-COVID. Now, that time we weren't performing the digital marriages.
So think
yet.
about it. January of 2020, that is like 30 days before COVID.
Yeah. So COVID hadn't hit yet. We launched and we went live, which means we'd already beta tested it. We started beta testing in October. We'd been through beta tests. We were in live in January of 2020. And then And I went through and did it myself. I utilized my own marriage certificate as the test to show people how much I trusted this system. I trusted this system so much that I was willing to do this to my data, to create a hash out of my marriage certificate and put it on the Ethereum blockchain.
Now, she had already been married before. That was a separate conversation. This is a true marriage, a brand new marriage.
Yeah.
With a brand new man,
Mhm.
real relationship.
Yep.
This is real.
Yes. Yeah. We
You've
have a little girl.
And the little girl is gorgeous.
Yeah.
She goes to all of her meetings with her. Maybe, well, anyway.
Yeah. She wanted to come here tonight, but I thought
Everybody-
she might
she's
distract
what,
us a
3
little
now?
bit. She's 4 now.
Wow.
She's 4 now. So, so this is a, real marriage. And what we need to realize is that the metaverse, the digital world, and the physical world are colliding. And so things that happen in the digital world are real. They are happening in the physical world.
Mhm.
And there's an intersection, and that's where we need to play. So I took this digital certificate, and January, nobody had it. Very few people. And then when COVID hit, thousands, people all over the state of Utah started utilizing it. Just where we are, we're in Utah. And so that was the first place. We had basically other county clerks' offices were literally putting papers on their door because they were shut for COVID. They would put a paper on their door that would say, go to the Utah County website to get a marriage license, because we can't give you one, but I could through the internet. And then we started hearing from people that they had a hard time having people accept it. And I hadn't changed my name yet. I had been married and I had the marriage certificate, but I actually hadn't changed my name yet.
So you have your legal birth name, then you have a new marriage name,
Mhm.
and then you now enter this new digital marriage.
Right. So I took my marriage certificate and I went to my bank and I said, I need to change my name on my bank account. And they said, okay, well, we just need like a marriage certificate. And I was like, awesome, I have it right here. Who do you want me to email it to? And they're like, no, we need the actual marriage certificate. And I was like, yeah, it's right here. And they were like, no, we need like the real one that the county clerk gave you. I was like, yeah, this is it.
So real one, nowadays people can actually create a video with somebody saying something they didn't even say with
Right.
AI, let alone take a document and put
Right.
it embossing and seal. There's no counterfeit is like easy
Right.
these days.
In fact, it's easier to counterfeit a paper document than it is
Yeah.
a cryptographically sealed document. So we actually have a more secure system. So I'm giving it to them, and they said, well, we can only accept the actual one from the clerk's office. And I was like, that's cool. This is the actual one from the clerk's office. And they said, well, we don't know what to do. And I was like, well, that's cool. Just get your manager on the phone and I'll talk to your manager. So they called, the head office, and they're like, well, we have this person and they have this digital marriage certificate. And they're like, no, we need like the actual one. And they're like, well, she's saying it's the actual one. So I get the manager on the phone and I'm like, what's your email address? I'll just email it to you. So they give me the email address and I email it to them. And they're like, well, we need the paper one. And I said, why? They're like, so that we can scan it and attach it to your file. And I'm like, cool. Why can't I just email you this one and you can attach it to my file and you can skip the scanning step? Like, you can skip a whole step here. Just take that and attach it. And they were like, well, how do we know this is real? I said, well, just call the county clerk's office. And they're like, oh, okay, we'll call the county clerk's office. And I'm like, cool. So while you're calling the county clerk's office, do me a favor. And they said, yeah. And I said, look at who the county clerk is. And they're like, oh, it's Amelia Powers Gardner. And I said, cool, now look at that marriage certificate. And they're like, oh, it's Amelia Powers changing her name to Gardner. I said, yeah, I'm the county clerk. You're going to call my office and ask if my digital seal is real. And so the manager did. The manager called up the county clerk's office and they're like, we have someone standing here who has this digital marriage certificate, and she's wanting to know, and she's wanting to use it to change her name, and we want to know if it's real. And they're like, is our boss standing in front of you with her digital marriage certificate? And they're like, yeah. It's like, yeah, that's real. They're like, we've never seen one before. Right. You've not ever had a disruptive person get elected to public office before. It's real. It's really her. That's a real marriage certificate. And she just wants to change her name on her bank account. So we went through that process. And then we got through COVID. We ended up having 2,000 of them. And then we had 10,000 of them. And then we had 12,000 of them. And then we had 20,000 of them. And the majority of those were in the state of Utah. 75% of them were in the state of Utah. So along the Wasatch Front, the DMVs started getting this. The DMVs, they would start showing up and they're like, people would say, I want to change my name on my driver's license. And they'd say, well, we need, your marriage certificate. And about, the 10th, 12th, 20th one that they saw, they were like, I think this is really a thing. So the Wasatch Front started accepting them, but we still had rural areas that weren't accepting them because they hadn't seen as many. So we actually went and passed a law in the state of Utah that a digitally verified document has the same rights and privileges as a paper credential. And so we now have in the state of Utah that you can, at any government building, so whether this is for, your WIC benefits or unemployment insurance, or if it's for your driver's license, any government document has to be able to accept this. So we've passed that law. That's in law here in the state of Utah. And then we've gone through the process. We're right now as a state running a pilot so that we can approve what a verified digital credential is. And a verified digital credential, it's going to protect your privacy. It's going to have security. It's doing the things that we need to do. That the system that I built checks those boxes, and the system that you've built that follows that lead checks those boxes. But it allows you to control your data. It allows you to verify the data. It's secure, and it's convenient.
And so this is actually an alternative in the state of Utah. I remember back in the day when you actually sign a document physically and you needed a real notary, that was the only thing that was accepted. A real notary, a real signature, and you couldn't do a digital signature. And then the first place to actually approve this was the European Union when they adopted a standard where things like EchoSign, now Adobe Sign, as well as VeriSign, all these different signature systems, they can actually start being used in such a way. I've lost a couple feeds here, but they could be used in such a way where it was actually recommended or received. I'm going to see if I can get it back. So what I'm trying to say is there's a day when a digital document signature was not accepted. And you've actually fast forwarded to not just a digital signature, but a digital document. And now it's not only for bank accounts, but it's also for driver's licenses. Massively disruptive.
So there's a background on this. The key to this is with digital documents, instead of paper documents, when a digital document is created and the digital system is created, you actually have the ability to control your document. All the government does is they create that document. So there's a trust level. Ironically, even though trust in government is at an all-time low, we still trust government created documents, particularly for things like identity. So the key is if the government creates the document, if they originate that document, once the document is created or originated, then ideally that is turned over to you because it's your identity and therefore it's your document and you then control it. You can control who has access to it. You can also ideally control what parts of it they have access to. Think of your driver's license. When you, if you wanted to go into a bar and they want to scan your driver's license, all they really need to know is that you are over the age of 21. But when you give them your driver's license, you're giving them your address, your age, your date of birth. You're giving them all of that. You
used to give them your social security number. They used to stick these things on your social security
number.
Right.
They used to put your social security number on your driver's license. So with a digital document, the government originates it and they create it so that there's a trust factor there for all of the people that are checking that document. But once it's created, you control the access to it and you control what they see. And then that authentication can be verified utilizing decentralization, a distributed ledger, a public blockchain. You can then verify that this is the original document and that's unaltered. So when we look at registering a hash, what we can do is you can say, has this image been altered? You don't actually get to see the data on the image. So you don't know my mother's maiden name when you see my marriage certificate at that point, but you know that that image is unaltered and that I did get married and therefore you can update my name.
And so it's being deployed around the world by other countries. And one of the biggest compelling events that I actually personally saw was we have this thing called COVID, which is like this pandemic that the world experienced, kind of. And in Canada, they really like to lock things down. There's some Canadians on this call, by the way. And in Ontario, which is a province in Canada, they basically said you can't get a marriage certificate from the province of Ontario unless you have your vaccination.
Okay, you don't know this, but on Thanksgiving Day, I got a text message from a United States Senator Mike Lee. And I had gotten like 100 text messages, and is everybody saying Happy Thanksgiving? And I'm trying to make 40 mashed potatoes. I'm trying to make mashed potatoes for 40 people. So I've got my apron on, and I'm over at the stove, and I'm making mashed potatoes for 40 people, and my phone's blowing up. And I just hand it to my husband, and I say to my husband, "Hey, will you reply to all these people telling me Happy Thanksgiving?" And he's going through replying, and he gets to the text from Senator Mike Lee, and he's like, "Have you seen this video from Mike?"
Great senator, by the way.
Yeah,
Great
and he
guy.
says, "Have you seen this senator from Mike? Have you seen this? Video from Senator Mike Lee?" And I said, "No. Is it not just a Happy Thanksgiving?" And he's like, "I don't think so. You should watch this." So okay, bring my phone over. So he brings my phone over, and I wonder if I can even pull it up. I'll just see if I can pull it up and see if I can show you this video.
This is awesome. While she's looking it up, I'll kind of tell you what happened. So there's all these people up in Ontario. They're like, we want to get married, but because we can't go anywhere.
Well, this is a story about it.
All right, I'm here today in southern Israel. Just met this gentleman. Tell me your name again. Josh got married in Provo online. Tell us how that happened.
My wife's from Colorado, and we were looking for a place to get married during COVID. Colorado wasn't accepting Zoom weddings, and we found Utah. We had an amazing wedding. Loved the guy who officiated it. It was a great experience, and thank you so much for bringing that to the world.
So, and then he goes on for a little bit more, but basically this is an IDF soldier who's serving in southern Israel in the war right now, and Senator Lee was there and says, "I'm United States Senator from Utah." And the guy says, "My wife is from Toronto, and we couldn't get married during COVID. So we found your system, and we facilitated his marriage from Toronto because of exactly what you said. They didn't have the certificate of vaccination, and so Toronto wouldn't marry them. And so they got married in Utah via Zoom."
So like Toronto's over here, Israel's over here. In the middle, you got Utah. But in the digital world, it doesn't matter. We're all on Earth.
Right.
We're all on Earth. And then let's continue with Israel. So in Israel, it wasn't just a male and a female that got married. Can you kind of go through that story?
Yeah. So we actually had so in Israel, civil marriage is not legal. You can only have Orthodox religious marriages. So you can't, not only was gay marriage not legal, but also cross-religious marriages were not legal. So like a Christian couldn't marry a Jew, or a Muslim couldn't marry a Christian. Only Orthodox marriages were legal because the rabbinate controls marriage. And before COVID, people would fly to Cyprus and have a marriage ceremony and then fly back and have their reception. Or they would get on a boat and go out to international waters, and they would get married utilizing a marriage license from the Maldives and then come back and have their marriage celebration. But during COVID, Cyprus shut down flights and people couldn't go out to international waters. And so nobody, unless they were ultra Orthodox, could get married in Israel. So we started performing Zoom marriages, which is, it was very prominent in Israel, which is why this IDF soldier had heard about it with his wife in Toronto. And so we started performing these marriages. But the way the laws work in Israel is if you get married in another country, they have to recognize it. So they got to the point that they were recognizing the marriages for straight couples, but they were not recognizing the marriages for gay couples. And a group of gay couples actually created a class action lawsuit and went all the way to the Supreme Court in Israel.
About 2,000 couples, right?
Yeah. And they went to the Supreme Court in Israel, and we got a unanimous verdict from the Supreme Court of Israel that the country of Israel has to recognize our marriages because they have an apostille seal, which is part of the Geneva Convention.
So the Geneva Convention is going to be a big key part of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So think about it. We're talking about physically can't travel because of a pandemic that kind of happened. And now we're talking about a war-torn environment, at least even today, where things are kind of awry. And you're seeing, I thought they were lucky to come up. Last I heard the number was 37,000. So now I was thinking maybe 40,000 because it's been, what, I don't know, 8 months since I've seen you or something. And you're over 55,000 online digital marriages.
Yeah. And so here's the thing, it's more convenient. So one of the reasons that you want to do this is government should be serving its people. People shouldn't have to bend to the demands of government. Government should serve people where they are. So that's more convenient. But it's so much more than that, because as you start to look at it, it is more secure. Your data is more secure, cryptographically sealed and registered in a distributed ledger than it is on a government database. It's easier to hack a government database than it is. You would need quantum computing with derived keys in order to hack people's information if it's been cryptographically sealed, fractioned, and stuck on a distributed ledger.
And that's one at a time. So if someone wants to go after one person, they have to target them and then have crazy computing capabilities. And what people don't understand,
Like nation state level.
Mhm.
Nation state level.
And that's just to hack one document, whereas someone could just get a printer and some software and do it on their own.
Yeah.
So that's the difference we're talking about. So recognizing it, whether it's through a pandemic, maybe through a war, and it's actually a future type of system. Now let's back up and look at things a little differently. One of the other big things that we're going to run through is what we call, and you may have heard of this before, GDPR. So the European Union actually has a legal framework that they let roll out, provided due process, and notified everybody, and basically said you can't collect data from the 27 different nation states. Now they're nation states, okay, that are inside of the European Union, like, you know, Germany, etc. You can't collect data from someone in this physical region and store it in a remote database. So we're not saying the database isn't secure, which they're not. We're not saying that it doesn't have physical access or some form of ITIL processes around the security around the data. We're saying they can't they're saying they can't physically restore it somewhere else. And so they provide the notice. Most of you probably remember when all the websites started having these buttons that popped up around cookies and actually started saying, I have to actually allow for my data to be given. So where I've been browsing, what I'm searching for, what I'm buying, where I'm going, all of that data, and people don't understand that, all of that data is actually linked to the individual's name and identity through not only profiles that are where you log into different systems, whether it's through Apple, whether it's through Google, and these Google systems actually use technology that link your name, your number, your authentication with mobile devices with IMEI numbers. So all your devices, whether it's a MAC address on a computer or an IMEI number on a phone, all of these different devices are all combined into an entity where the remote marketers, let's say Toyota, by the way, I love Toyota, #1 car manufacturer, at least distribution today in the world. But let's say Toyota wants to pay Google or they want to pay Facebook to be able to profile to you. Mm-hmm. So they can actually get your name and your search history, maybe even know more things about you than is even, I won't even go into the 2,500 different data points that just Facebook searches. But they basically can now know all this data about you, and all GDPR said was you have to approve it. But what if instead of Toyota paying Google and paying Facebook to know your name, what if there's actually a future where instead of a European Union, maybe it's a Pacific Union where kingdoms actually come together, nations come together, communities come together and say, enough is enough. I want to own my own identity. I want to own my own data. I want to own my own reputation. I want to own my own assets. And I want to verify it. And I want to actually pass it to future generations based upon what prior generations gave me. And so we're in a space and time here where in the Second World War, the European Union was created. It started out with 5 or 6 countries, nation states. Now it's 27. We talk about a lot of other things with dollars and euros and maybe NATO and all this other stuff that comes about. But what if an ecosystem were to launch and it wasn't just a union like what we're talking about there? Let's say that there's maybe a instead of the second war kicking off something with the European Union, maybe there's like a third war or something crazy. And there's something that actually pops from there. Imagine an ecosystem where you have different assets that can actually tie to one another. You have different paradigms that can link. You have the ability to do transactions. You have the ability to actually pull economies together. You have regions that are not just in the European Union, but they counterbalance other ecosystems. Imagine these systems actually being able to come together and provide a better system for folks in the future, whether it's around assets, whether it's around identities. And the identity stuff is a very interesting approach. So imagine it's not just a driver's license that the DMV actually works with. What else do you get at the DMV?
Yeah, your titles to your vehicles, license plates.
And right now, the same thing they're doing with individuals, they're doing with vehicles. You may not realize this. Some of you may not because of the rural parts of the world you're in, but in metropolitan areas, they actually take your license plate numbers and they're actually tracking them with cameras that are very smart and fast. And they can see where you're going around. Sean, the first time I met with Sean, he told us about this company that they.
Well, and on top of that, your titles, there's a lot of title fraud right now, especially in vehicles. They're having a huge problem with title fraud where people are stealing vehicles in one state, creating a fake title for them and selling them in another state. And then people are buying these vehicles and then they find out that they're stolen later on. And a digital seal makes that harder, right?
So this is actually a vehicle title registration that ties off of an individual's driver's license as well, but it can actually tie to, so you can scan a license plate like this and actually pulls up, is this car stolen? Is this car insured? Is this car financed?
Well, and even when you look at us having to be beholden to government, during COVID, I sold my Harley Davidson motorcycle and I sold it to a guy from Oregon, but my title was out of Illinois, because I had lived in Illinois previously. And so the Illinois DMV was shut down for a year and a half. So the dude in Oregon was driving my Harley around with an Illinois license plate that wasn't even registered.
You're
to
a
him.
good person. He was trusting you that you would even send it to him.
He just trusted that I would send it to him. But we had to wait until the Illinois DMV was no longer closed for COVID before I could send it to him.
So think about the dysfunction there.
But I should have been able to just be like, yeah, I'm selling it to you. You give me the money. I transfer you the title while we're standing there.
Boom. So if you really just understood what she just said, it's like this guy had to actually trust that she was not going to take his money and just run off. And she would actually follow through with getting, because it's a pain in the butt. Like, for instance, I have almost bought every Tesla that's made, and I buy them out of the state, not in the state of Utah. I buy them at other states and move them here. And if you actually want to license a vehicle in the state, the process is you got to go to a police station, have them look at your VIN ID, and then they verify that it's real. Think about the logic there.
Right.
So the point being is not only marriages, but identities, registrations, any kind of license, any kind of system. And I don't think you've actually seen some of this stuff. Here, I'll show you parts and pieces of it in real time. So what I'm doing, this is actually a Clear phone, but it works on any Android phone, any Armor phone, any Freedom phone, any Apple phone. That's a new thing, by the way. It works on Apple now.
That is new. It did not used to.
So I'm going to log in here. So again, no username and passwords inside of this world. 5-factor authentication, something I have, something I do in a certain space and time. So here you can see if I want to actually start a vehicle search or register a vehicle. So let's say I want to add a vehicle. Can someone give me a license plate number? You guys know I don't ever track any of this stuff. License plate number from anybody on the call. And
LHL 317.
what state is that out of?
Hawaii.
LHL 317. So this is actually going to check Asia, Europe, as well as American driver's licenses, whether it's VIN numbers or whether it's license plates, and it'll actually find that vehicle or that asset. So is that vehicle this VIN and this color and this, what is this, a Chevrolet Equinox 2018? Tracking?
Chevrolet 2018 Equinox.
Okay.
Yep.
So imagine being able to take an asset like this, being able to finance it, being able to insure it, being able to pay for it, and maybe you could even do things with it where, and people may not realize what's already passed in law. I don't know why they're doing this, but here we go. A vehicle has to have not only a kill switch, but video surveillance, audio surveillance, and some of them have the ability to be remote controlled
And they could even limit if you can drive in them if you don't actually lock your seatbelt. Volvo, by 2025, 100% of their vehicles is actually going to be electric, and they're like that, like literally. Like we're talking about.
Well, I have a friend who they just bought a new Ford and they didn't have their seatbelt on and it muted their radio.
Yeah.
And it literally said, if you want to unmute the radio, plug in your seatbelt.
I actually
fasten your seatbelt to unmute the radio.
A lot of these different vehicles that are electronic, I actually went and bought them, whether it was electric motorcycles, electric cars, even the Volvo. And the Volvo makes it dumb if you don't log into your Google account. It basically becomes the weakest Bluetooth headset that you've seen. Like every time you get in, you got to resync it. It's just this brilliant smart car, but if you don't log into the centralized systems, you can't actually use it. And why would this be effective, or why would this be valuable or invaluable? What you're looking at is a system. Imagine instead of the European Union, you have this Pacific Union that has all these different kingdoms and cultures, which in my opinion are actually the most oppressed, controlled, abused. And I'm leaping over all of the different indigenous communities within the North America, or, the Canadians, the Chickasaws, the Cherokees, the Kunas, the Hopis, the Navajos. These are wonderful people. And we think that COVID's the first time that we've done sterilization to one another or genocide to one another. The Navajos, there's 75,000 people. They've gone through 2 sterilizations way before COVID ever started. And we're talking, I physically, there's people that have sat right in that chair, women that have been through it and they know it's real. So we won't talk about vaccinations or control, but what we'll talk about is how can technology actually be the future for society. And in this particular ecosystem, we're talking about certifications. Maybe it's birth certificates, adoption, marriage, which is what we just talked about. Mm-hmm. Maybe death. Maybe it's a council that governs these ecosystems. Maybe they can control different councils, spin them up, spin them down, have their own agendas, have their own approvals, have their own votes. Maybe it's disputes. Maybe it's something where multiple people come together. Yeah. They don't even have to disclose their identity, but they can actually get paid, and it proves that they got paid. Imagine an ecosystem where you've got licensing, kind of like what we're talking about here, but it's for an individual to actually operate them, or like the.
Well, you would completely eliminate the concept of deadbeat dad, because if you put child support on a smart contract, then it's tied to those assets.
Imagine not only that, but you tie marriage and accountability for a child between 2 consenting adults that come, a mother and a father, because you can't twist that one. You can't do the opposite. But 2 parents that come together under God that say, mm-hmm. I'm actually wanting to connect with you, not through a government, not through asking for permission, but because I actually like you, maybe love you, and we want to actually come together to create this life, which then has responsibility. And there's so much, if you talk about the core issues within society, in my opinion, it's all around single parents. It's all around an ecosystem where a child is being brought up within a system that tells the parents that they can raise them better. I can say this because I grew up in foster care systems from age 9 to 16 in the state of California. And my mother, which is an amazing woman, literally in many ways just conformed to a system. And the system they're easy to come in and say, you're not a good fit parent. You're not doing this and this and this and this right. And I promise you, as a parent, there's no one in the world that's going to care about, not from some state agency, not from some paid anything, that's going to care more about a child than that parent. So if a parent, 2 people, male, female, come together to create a child, and then you link that to a contract that says, well, for this many years, this is the commitment. And so you bond that together, and then you go through, like, for instance, let's say there's a dispute and a full-blown divorce. Like, you can go through a process of unwinding the marriage. That's something that Utah County is not doing today. Right. But imagine, just as you wind up a marriage, you can unwind a marriage, but the consequences in between that, those lives that were created, the most beautiful gift, and this isn't given from the state, this is given from God, the ability to co-create life. What's your daughter's name?
Genevieve.
You know what I mean, mm-hmm. She's not your own. You've got 5?
We've got 6 total.
Now.
Yeah.
The ability to create life, in my opinion, is one of the most
important gifts that we've been given, not to create life, but to co-create. And if a system can actually not only look at it from, and kind of like from these certificates, was the individual born or maybe adopted? And are they in an ecosystem? Like when we started this meeting, we talked about a private membership association. Well, what does that really mean? And can we choose to be a part of them? Or is it just a byproduct of, two people came together and it just so happens that in a certain physical location, something was born. Now they're a part of that. That's all they are. Because can we be citizens by choice?
I mean, it's hard, but I mean, it's part of the citizenry is choice. Part of it is a birthright, but you can also refuse that birthright, right? You can refuse that birthright and say, I don't want to be that, that.
But
citizen.
historically, it's pretty difficult.
Mhm.
And what you end up with is these people that are actually tied as citizens within these cultures, and that's just who they identify as. That's just who they are. And we're seeing languages and travel and all these things that are these barriers that are coming down. And it's really, we live on a floating rock, this beautiful earth that we get to float around on. And it really has water that is just separated by earth. And we make these fictitious imaginary lines that sometimes we call them borders and enforce them. I mean, we've got this year, 2024, in the last, 16 months, we got 14 million people that have walked across the border that used to be enforced. Now it's not enforced.
Well, and I have a nephew who's in Ecuador right now because he was down there doing some charity work and fell in love with a beautiful Ecuadorian lady. And in order to get her to come here, it's a 2-year wait because of these borders. But love doesn't have borders, right? So he's now in Ecuador waiting out 2 years with her so that he can bring her back here. But in the digital world, that's not necessary, right? In the digital world, you can make these things happen. You also have an economy of scale. If you look at the traditionally oppressed peoples of the Pacific nations, a lot of them don't have the ability, their governments, and this is coming from local government budgets are tight. Like we don't even have enough budget oftentimes to put our people through leadership training. Like we don't have enough to put our supervisors through leadership training. They don't have the ability to launch these systems. The marriage license system that Utah County built, our initial system cost me about $120,000 to build. That was the beta. The beta system cost $120,000 to build, and we've spent about $100,000 a year since then. We're at over $500,000 that we've invested in this system. Now we've netted over $3 million in return. So it has given us a significant ROI. However, we've had to shell out $500,000 in the last 5 years. A small government oftentimes doesn't have that ability. I had to talk to commissioners into taking a risk to give me that $120,000 by promising them this is going to pay for itself. Now, I thought it would take 3 years to pay for itself, but then COVID happened and it took like 4 months. But I had to talk them into take $120,000 and invest that from a local government budget is huge. I was taking a huge risk. If this hadn't panned out, I wouldn't have won re-election, right? But I took that risk knowing that it would pan out. But if you get together and this is the technology that you've built it in a way that you then crowdsource that, right? And if you have 10 nation states and you spend $500,000 updating it, each one of those nation states only has to spend $50,000, right? And they're going to get those updates.
Imagine kind of like what we're looking at here, where you have different jurisdictions that can actually use, we got some live mics, which is fine. There's fun birds, but imagine a kingdom of Atui or Aotearoa, or maybe Hawaii or Indonesia or Samoa. And there's many others that are not just kingdoms, but they may be counties, or they may be countries, or they may be nations that actually use that same framework, the same system like we're looking at here. This particular one is the Kingdom of Hawaii. Some people may look at it as the Hawaiian Kingdom. Some people may look at it as, different perspectives, but ultimately you're seeing it lock in to how they can actually do things from not a centralized way, a decentralized way, with the individual in the middle of it, connecting to something that is not just government.
Right. Right, and you can have peer-to-peer transactions that takes government out of it. The other part of this is the morality part. Like it's awesome that this is more convenient for the people, and it's fantastic that it's got a superior level of security. But on top of that, there's a moral aspect of that, and that is serving people where they are. Right, you're looking at people in rural communities or single moms that can't take a day off work. How do those people go get a birth certificate? How do we get somebody to get a birth certificate that's in a rural community that in a third world country? What do they do? Ride a bus take 3 days off work and ride a bus so that they can go get a birth certificate at a government building? That's crazy. We can issue that on their cell phone. So there's a moral aspect of it, serving underserved, traditionally marginalized populations. This includes the elderly, the disabled, the socioeconomically disadvantaged, the single moms, the rural folks. But on top of that, it's also green and sustainable because we're not printing all this paper. We're not putting the carbon footprint of driving. Just here in our own county, our largest growth sector of the county is on the other side of a lake. And for them to get to our government building, it's over an hour commute on crowded roads to go around a lake to go get a birth certificate.
Did you know that Fiji alone spends $3.2 million US dollar equivalent to just print the money and put it in ATMs every year?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Because the money is actually pretty cool in Fiji. It looks like New Zealand and Canada and Australia because it follows, the colonial-based systems. But they're a cash-based society much more, kind of like Vanuatu and these other countries. They're 100. They're not. I shouldn't say 100, but close to a high percentage of transactions are either what they call e-money, which is not the system that we're talking about right here. I'm going to try and figure out who this is. My goodness. Raymond, I'm going to mute you, buddy. There we go. Evans. Okay. So I think the point's been made that there is a future coming.
And it needs to be decentralized. It's going to be digital, whether we want it to or not. The future will be digital. We need to make sure that it's a decentralized, secure.
Well, let's talk about that for a
sovereign.
second. You know that I'm 190%, like everything in my life is all behind exactly what you just said. Decentralized versus centralized. But why do you think, because we come at it from different perspectives. Why do you think that that's such an important part of what we accomplish in our lifetime for future generations?
Without a decentralized system, we don't have privacy. We don't have autonomy. We don't have liberty. Right. And we as individuals are endowed by our creator with a right to privacy, with a right to security, with a right to own our individual selves. We are not wardens of a state. And if we have a centralized system, if your money is in a centralized system and your identity is centralized and the government doesn't like what you want to spend your money on, they can choose what you can spend your money on. And this works on both sides of the political ideology. On the one side, if you believe that abortion is a woman's right and your government doesn't, they can prevent you from paying for an abortion, whether or not you want one. And on the flip side, if you believe that we have a right to self-defense and to guns and to own the right to bear arms, but the government doesn't want you to buy a gun, they can prevent you from buying a gun. And you can't even buy one on the black market because you don't have cash. Right. And so the ability to spend your money, a free economy, and the ability to spend your money is freedom of speech. Mm-hmm. It is liberty. It is autonomy.
What if we fast forward just till May of next year? So we're talking, what are we at? We're at April 2nd. So less than a year away from today, 11 months and 5 days, something like that. Yeah. What happens when this Real ID becomes valid and you actually can't go into a governmental building like a bank or like an airport, and because you don't have a recognizable ID? By the way, you all remember when you used to travel and you actually had to get that boarding pass and it meant something? It's like, show me your ID and your boarding pass because we're going to validate your name. Remember when you could actually go to the gate and say goodbye to your friends? What 9/11 was the one that shut that down. So all of these different things just gradually close down your rights. But there's a point where enough is enough. Enough is enough. And the individual should actually stand up for one another. When we see someone that's in the street because they don't have a home. When we see someone, I was actually in another part of the world, and I go in and I learn these systems. So I went into a DMV, started understanding what is all the things, and they changed the rules right in front of you. And this lady was like, I said to her, you want 2 forms of this and 2 forms of this in my original birth certificate with the original seal, even though I'm already in your system, I already have a driver's license, I can show it to you, but it's expired. So I had an expired driver's license. I had one that was valid and updated. I just didn't have the actual physical one. It was even a real ID, and they still wouldn't issue another one. Okay. And I said to her, what do other people do when they can't prove this? Because I have means, I'm affluent, I can figure this stuff out. You know, I can basically just call up an insurance agency and say, change my address. That doesn't mean I live there. But other people, they don't have the means. And she says to me, well, that's why people are homeless.
Well, you know what's crazy about that is one of the most underserved populations that doesn't have an ID and that can't prove their identity are people that were recently incarcerated and released from jail.
Or they've just gone across the border.
Well, here's what frightens me about that. If we can't prove who you are and we're not sure who you are, why did we let you out of jail?
Or across the border.
We know who they are. We let them out of jail. We let them out of jail because they'd served their term or whatever. If we didn't know who they are, we shouldn't have let them out of jail. But we did. But we can't issue them an ID.
It's just broken. And the thing that just tore
There's
my
also a
heart out.
security aspect of it. If your ID is tied to your biometrics, you can't fake that when you come across the border. That's actually a security feature.
And these new cryptographic keys can actually link in your biometrics. And it's even better than that. But this lady at this DMV, when she said that to me, that's why people are basically homeless.
Yeah.
I says, well, why would you say that? She says, well, because they can't get an ID, then they can't get a bank account. She knows this and is still doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And do we judge her because of it? She's doing her job, right? I would also argue that a lot of these centralized systems are not only closing in tightly by design, but the way that they're deploying it and the way that people work within these systems, how they're housed, how they're treated, it's all basically secret combinations. And this date of this May 2007, what I believe is going to happen and why I believe this GDRP future, not with the European Union, but with literally the digital world launching something that is an alternative to GDRP, but instead of just being around privacy, it's around human rights. Yeah. So they can actually have their own ability, not just to self-determination, but to their identity, to their data, to their reputation, to their assets, and to their ability to exist. The Constitution of the United States of America, specifically with amendments, not only says you can bear arms and all these other things, but you can actually travel. The Supreme Court was challenged on this about 6 years ago, and they came out and said, not only do you not need to have a driver's license, but you don't have to have a license plate, and you don't have to have insurance. Now think about that. States would say, nah, we created rules that you have to have insurance. But where in a state does it say that you actually have to have a license plate that says, oh, well, you've been in the state for 3 months and you haven't changed out your license plate. Well, maybe I'm just passing through. So I would intentionally buy these cars in other states, California mainly, and drive them here in Utah to see. I got one ticket, and I told the officer, I says, I'll see you in court because I'm going to go through the process of understanding how you think that you can force me to change my license plate from one state to another state. You're forcing me to charge another, cost of it, etc. So the basis of this new digital data protection regulation, future of GDRP, is actually for human rights. It's for that individual that sleeps on that street because they couldn't get an ID that would fit into this new system. Yet the future of IDs, especially when we look at this Hawaiian Kingdom.
Well, if you think about it, it's because they couldn't get the government document that proves their identity.
You got it.
Right. But once that document was created, if it was tied to their biometrics, they should be able to access it with any computer.
On their own, right?
On their own.
And so for those that are not aware, when you get a technology, like this particular technology is actually from the Hawaiian Kingdom, and specifically will be reviewed when we talk about what is the Hawaiian Kingdom, what is the Kingdom of Hawaii? What are all the different organizations? What is the difference? What's the history? When you start understanding this, it may be very fascinating. But imagine you get 12 words like what's in the middle here. You link those with your biometrics, your fingerprint and or your face and others. So again, this is available on Apple, Android, as well as any of the Clear ecosystems. On your existing phone or on news, they're built in. But you can actually get a physical birth certificate or a digital one. And if you notice on these, or this is a physical one, the other one is a digital. If you notice on here, this QR code can actually be scanned to validate the names. So on these certificates, you actually don't even need the full name. So imagine you've got a photo and you've got a first name and you've got a QR code. That's enough for an officer to pull over and say, hey, I've actually scanned this license plate and I see it's insured, it's not stolen, it's financed, these are the owners, and these are the valid drivers. And when I dig into the drivers, I know that there's an individual that looks like this, but I can't see his last name. But the officer can actually push a button and it pings the driver and it says, I want to actually validate who I am. And then on the officer's side, it shows any information that user wants to share with them and then maybe even pull back. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. So you have to give them permission to see it.
Yes. What a concept.
Yeah.
What a concept.
They don't see your home address.
And not only that, the thing that's crazy about this is these systems are currently being built in a centralized format in war-torn environments, particularly Ukraine. Before the war with Russia invasion, which there was wars before that, they literally, and this is happening with secret combinations, not just governments, but.
And people don't realize that, people think that Florida is super free, right? In Florida, every time you purchase liquor, every time you go into a bar, every time you purchase something or go somewhere that they have to verify your age and they scan your ID, there's a database that tracks that.
They're tracking where people are going, what
Right.
they're doing. And it's not just
In the
those.
state of Utah, we have a law that all of that information has to be purged every 12 days. It cannot, by law, be kept longer than 12 days. In Florida, they keep it in perpetuity. They
Oh,
can
really?
track everywhere you've been. Yeah. But see, this is why Utah needs to be the ones to pilot this stuff.
So Utah is one of the ones that's actually on the other side of it, that's actually pushing for the digital driver's license.
But they're doing it in a
digital.
way that you get to, that they want to do it in the way exactly like you're describing, where the police officer says, I want to see your ID, and you say, you can see this information.
Yep.
They request it and you approve it. And they want to do it in a way that when you go into a bar, they don't even get to see your name. It's just like, this is my photo and I am over 21. And scan that and you can see me. All right, can I walk in now? But they don't have your name. They don't know who you are. And so Utah's trying to do it in a decentralized way.
And thank you for being a part of Utah that actually is helping that to
Thank
become a reality. Because I know that Utah would not be in the role that it's in, the position that it's in. I mean, I look at some of the other stuff that she's done as a leader, not just as running, because she's not a politician. She didn't even want to run. She was kind of duped into it. But now that she's into it, she's making a real difference. But when COVID came out, the government's basically looked at this thing around, oh, you're vaccinated or you're not vaccinated, so you can travel. Well, you know what she came up with? Within like literally under a month. Well, you actually can take a blood test and have a doctor look at your blood and see if you actually have the right antibodies to combat that. So in effect, you vaccinated yourself because you got sick and you're actually healthy now.
Mhm.
So it's not just are you vaccinated or non-vaccinated, but are you inoculated? So there's things that are technology if it's intelligently organized, it can actually help governments. It can help the individual. It doesn't enslave them, but it's got to be done in such a way where there are truly people in government like you that want to really make a difference.
Yeah, but you'd be shocked at how many people, when they hear me talk about a digital ID or they hear me talk about a blockchain ledger, they think it's the opposite. So they're fighting. Like the law that we got passed that said a digital certificate has the same rights and privileges as a paper certificate. There's actually a group of activists that are trying to get that removed from law because they don't realize that actually gives them the ability to control their information instead of allowing the government to control it.
So awareness
Awareness is huge.
is massive.
And recognizing that technology isn't evil, that it can be used for good or bad, and that we're going that way anyway. It doesn't matter what you and I think. The world is going digital. We need to make sure that it goes digital in the right way, not the wrong way.
I think one of the points that you talked about around currency. So let's say that currency is digital, and if you don't truly own it from a creation or ownership standpoint, someone can actually control your behaviors.
Yeah.
If
Which we in Utah, we've actually banned central bank digital currencies. That law passed this session. So we've banned central bank digital currencies, but we've also done the opposite, that our governments in Utah can accept digital currency as payment for taxes. So if you donated to the truckers in Canada and Justin Trudeau froze your bank account, you could actually pay your taxes using Bitcoin.
But instead, what they did up there was they didn't give the money back. They kept it, and then they had officers show up at some of the donors' doorsteps saying, "You better watch yourself. You shouldn't be donating to these types of terrible things around farmers and truckers." So I don't know if you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. We'll go ahead and open it up for questions, thoughts, comments, feedback. The time is now yours. I apologize if I've muted you before, but thank you for being here. And if you've got a question, now's your time. Amelia.
Yeah.
If you've got questions for Amelia. Raymond, we hear you chatting away there, buddy.
Maybe we were so thorough that they don't have questions because we answered all their questions.
Yeah. This body.
No, I have a question.
Go ahead.
And my question is always the same. So how do I get decentralized? I want to participate. I want to be in the decentralized world. How do I do that? I'm in Montreal. I'm in Canada.
One of the ways that you can start is start talking to your local MPs, right? Go talk to your local MPs. Let them know that this is a system that you want. Talk to your provincial government and say, I want us to have this system, and start pressuring them, letting them know that this is a system that you want. Canada, in theory, Canada should be one of the first places to adopt this, because there's so many rural areas in Canada that, people in the rural areas don't really have the ability to get to, particularly in the winter, to get to a government building well, right? And so Canada is one of the first places in the world that has adopted digital voting. And they've done that because of the remote areas and being able to cast a vote. So take those systems and say, I want that across the board, right? I want that.
But in a decentralized way.
In a decentralized way.
Everything
Yes.
is.
Yeah. So
Yeah, Trudeau is just.
yeah, I wouldn't start with him. I would start with your local MPs. I would start with your provincial government. And here's the thing. When you talk to them about it in the areas that this is the morally right thing to do. This serves the underserved populations. This is the green and sustainable thing to do. And talk about it in that aspect of it. Also, it's cheaper, right? And then you connect them with folks like Michael, that there's no reason that they couldn't adopt his system. Right. Like I said, I know that Canada has adopted a lot of digital voting ahead of countries like the US, particularly because of the remote areas.
But those systems are, they may be digital, but they're all corrupted. Well,
that's why utilizing a decentralized system and a blockchain system that utilizes cryptography, that makes it secure, and it makes it transparent.
Oh yeah, of course, absolutely.
I can tell you that British Columbia, so on the west coast of Canada, they were one of the first 3 provinces and parts of the world to actually roll out what we call DIDs, decentralized identifiers. And they did it with a particular technology. It was one of the original first versions, them and Sweden did. And they really do, the people in government on the west coast of Canada
truly wanted a solution. This was a little bit before Trudeau came in, but they built it off of a technology stack that has now been matured to the next level from the same developers. By the way, they've sat in the same chairs in the same offices, which, by the way, this is probably one of the last times we'll do an event like this here, particularly. There's some beautiful things that are changing. But British Columbia, they do care. The people in government do care. And one of the things that I've actually found is refreshing, because we can all point holes in society. We can all talk about the negative things, whether it's virtues, values, morals, control, non-control, secret combinations, elections. But when the rubber meets the road, we're people and we know people.
Mhm.
And people just like Amelia that can actually run it at the county layer. And people may not understand this, but the counties have more authority than the president, the sheriff, the ability to do. There's a reason why voting is at the county level in the United States of America. And the Constitution was built under God. So to feel bad around what you're trying to do, to say, you know what, I work in government, but I want government to actually serve the people and maybe have less in their lives, and to enable them to actually do something that's for the future and for betterment, and is actually under God. I don't think we should feel ashamed by saying that. I don't, and some people say, you know what, that's totally wrong. And I would in some ways agree that technology, politics, and religion, the three, when you mix them and force them anywhere, that's wrong, because that takes away choice. So if you separate them and let technology actually do things based upon what the majority wants, not what a political agenda is or some type of financial agenda or some type of religious agenda, but literally let everyone's voice be heard.
Yeah.
And that's what this technology can do.
I think the key is start at your local level. Start at your, like I said, don't start at the federal or the national level. Start at your local level, and then elect leaders that embrace technology, not ones that fight technology. Right? And then just make sure as you go through, just make sure that they're writing, that they're pushing a decentralized system.
Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about decentralized versus centralized. I'm going to give you an example of a system that's probably one of the most mature systems on the face of the earth. And it was funded by the Visa Foundation. Raymond, I think you're still tapping away there, buddy. It's funded by the Visa Foundation, as well as, whether that's good or bad, as well as the United States of America. Again, this was before any of the invasion. And I'm just going to play this real fast.
A short video for you, so please attention to the screen.
What is DIA? DIA is a stake in smartphone. It is a useful tool that cares about millions of Ukrainians on a daily basis via DIA app. Ukraine is the first country in the world that allows its citizens to use digital passports as an alternative to physical ones, using which you can open a bank account in one click and travel around the country without originals. Your digital documents and variety of public services are available in one application, from driver's license to birth certificate, from paying taxes to sharing your car. Even nationwide polls are a direct expression of e-democracy. Anytime, any place. No paperwork, no stress, no lines, no bureaucracy. This is what DIA truly is.
So I want you to understand that this technology, as wonderful as it sounds, is actually centralized. Absolutely centralized. When you talk about centralized systems versus decentralized systems, I would argue that it is 1,000 times more complicated to build decentralized systems than it is to build centralized systems. Today, there's not a lot of ecosystems out there in the world that actually can truly build or have decentralized systems. I believe that the Pacific can actually be one of the first parts of the world that can actually accomplish that. I believe that coalitions, maybe countries, maybe kingdoms that can actually align with this energy and effort, that can actually standardize. So the software can all be open source. If there's problems with it, people can fix it and share it amongst each one of these ecosystems. In France, they made it law that any kind of technology that's going to be deployed will be open sourced, period. So I don't know if, like in America, everybody was always Microsoft, Microsoft, Microsoft. But in other parts of the world where they saw that security, transparency, honesty was actually being realized, and cost was being realized in a much more efficient way with open source technologies, and I believe that DIA with Ukraine will eventually go as open source technology. But does it link to central systems? And do the identifiers actually truly enable the individual to be truly anonymous or obfuscated? Those questions are still yet to be determined. But I can tell you that any of the clear companies, any of the digital world's efforts and energy around decentralization will help these future whether they're developing countries or fully developed countries, or maybe kingdoms that have been stolen long ago, but to help them to be able to stand up on their own, to be independent and to be transparent and serve not just their own, what you'd call citizens, which is a form of slavery, but nationals, their members, their residents, the people that would actually self-select to be a part of it. And I think just like in business, if people actually are given a choice to say, what country do I actually want? Because maybe parents don't have a choice to have a baby in a different country. They're forced to it. But if it's easy to say, I actually want to be maybe in Indonesia versus Africa, or they can choose to be able to be domiciled where they want to. We live in a time where travel is real, where communication is real, where data is real, where we really are facing the fact that there is one Earth. Some people argue whether it's flat or whether it's round. That's fun. That's fine. But the reality is we're all in one world with one people. And the sooner that we unite, the faster we can actually get through some of these elements. Did you have something you want to say?
No, I'm good. Just
Any other questions or thoughts or comments? Feedback?
Michael, can you hear me?
We got you.
Oh, awesome. Hello, how are you? Great presentation. I love coming here and listening to blockchain because I know it's fascinating. I do have one question about when you said how it can pull the information like the Toyota or the car straight from the system, the live system. What system is that pulling that from? Is that pulling that from the government systems because they're using the hyperledgers?
So hyperledgers is around the identity. For instance, the one in British Columbia that they're using, they used the first hyperledger, then they went to Hyperledger Indy, then they'll move over to a technology called Carry. Identity is a little bit different than the centralized databases that are out there. So for instance, whether people realize it or not only if you're in the medical association do you join as a member to be a doctor, or an attorney takes a bar, which is a private membership association, but also is the actual DMVs. There's DMVs that are private membership associations, particularly in regions. For instance, North America, Canada, and the US use a private membership association to say what data they're going to track. So think about it. You actually have a vehicle identification number, a license plate number that has to be renewed with a license plate tag, and then you've got all the other renewals, which really all they care about that really matters is safety. Is this vehicle safe to be on the road? But to answer your question directly, Becca, this data is pulled from Europe, from Asia, and from North America, and it can be tied based upon the prior. So imagine an ecosystem where you register a vehicle in a certain jurisdiction. Maybe it's in the Hawaiian Kingdom, and you can actually register it all around the world. Or maybe it's a boat, maybe it's a weapon, etc. But this registration number is actually a derived key from a private master key that the individual that created it actually owns. And as long as they don't lose those 12 words, they never have to renew it. So think about, like if you look right here, non-expiring. So you don't have to get your tags every year renewed. And the actual license plate number here, when the cameras see it, it's not going to register in their system, because when it's the opposite. When you scan this QR code, you can actually see the original license plate that it was. So it's a layer of obfuscation, not just for the individual, also for their assets. And their assets can be lots of different types of assets. Go ahead. You were going to ask something.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not sure if I'm asking the right question, but so in terms of like verification on, say, we pull it from the system, in terms of authentication on that chain, how does like the other chain, how is it stopping the authentication, like from the person not renewing their vehicle? I don't know if I'm asking the right question. So if it's authentication on the chain, like I get the keys, the derived keys, all that. But if it's pulling it from the system, how does the other system stop our system from, I guess, continuing,
Yeah,
renewing licenses?
Great question. Yeah, and I'm going to kind of answer it in a roundabout way. So imagine that we don't push this data into their system so that it can get tracked, but we go to them and say, for instance, here in Utah, one of the reasons a lot of this stuff is passing is because, one, the actual Supreme Court came out and said, you can provide your passport as an identification, and you don't have to have a driver's license in this form or this faction. And we're taking safety and putting it aside. But there was a young man that was actually killed. He was in his early 20s, and he's dead today. Wonderful young man. Mother also absolute patriot, tries to do the right things. But because there wasn't process and knowledge and training and awareness, this young man is dead. So imagine we go through this new GDRP replacement for the Digital Protection and Regulations Act, and we actually provide notice to the police departments, to the airlines, that says this is what an identity is. Mr. Bank, and banking is a whole nother beautiful conversation, because this whole digital world can actually replace them easily like that. The reason that 4 banks were shut down in the last 18 months is because they understand that it can be replaced like that. And they understand that it's a house of cards that's basically insolvent. If people are just paying attention, we all know that. But if it's a bank, if it's a travel organization, maybe an airlines, if it's a police department, and they don't actually, for instance, in GDRP, most people don't understand that if you do more than $250 million in revenue, or in some cases 50 employees, you have to actually hire a particular individual to do certain things around compliance. Otherwise, you're held liable. So imagine an airlines that doesn't have a policy around this, and someone shows up with, let's say, a passport, and that passport is valid, or maybe it's not even valid from an expiration standpoint, and they can prove their identity, but they don't have the gold star. Is it fair for that airlines to say, we're not going to let you on a plane? Since when did they become Border Patrol, right? So imagine a legal process that says it's human rights to make sure that if you can identify the person with this, this, and this, you need to let them pass. We live on one
Awesome.
earth. So and you're talking about, those are all centralized systems that actually don't have access into decentralized systems that would tie to these. So there's a process to taking a physical asset like a car and digitizing it in such a way where maybe you could actually finance it. Do you think that people would adopt this system if they could actually pay for a vehicle, get the license for the vehicle, the registration for the vehicle, the license plates for the vehicle, all of it, and it actually costs them what would normally cost $400 a month for the payment and the insurance, and they can do it for $200 a month? Because all of the other crazy factors, like in the healthcare world, literally almost 30% of the total cost of healthcare, which is the biggest cost in any industry, $135 per person per month on average, whether the individual's paying it, insurance, Medicaid, government, whatever. It's the biggest industry. And literally, it's all about mystery and margin in that industry. But imagine if payments went away and that 30% was off the top. Imagine what drugs would cost, which I don't agree with, or what pharmacies would cost, or OGB1. Go ahead.
Well, I would say, and even if going back to the license plate, the amount of money, the state of Utah is not a big state. We're a small state. We're not tiny, but we're like medium-sized state. We spend well over $1 million a year just sending out those expiring tags. And the only reason we spend $1 million a year sending out those expiring tags is because that's the only way, the digital way doesn't exist yet for that verification. And so the amount of money that can be saved is phenomenal.
It could be a simple email with a link that someone grabs their phone and scans it, and it's done. That could even do the payment. It could do the validation. It could do all of it.
Right.
So
you could even set it up with a smart contract so that as long as you still have that vehicle, it's just automatically drawing every year off of your digital asset.
I hope you're getting this. The rubber's starting to meet the road. Other questions before we
Yes.
wrap up? Any other thoughts, comments, feedback? Okay, we'll go ahead and call it. Thank you for your attendance, for your time.
Thank
We'll
you,
see
everyone.
next week, and thank you for
Absolutely.
the dedication to actually making a difference inside of government.
Thank you.
It's nice to see.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.
Thank